It's time now for a perspective. Over the past 5 weeks, around 350 people, survivors and family members of victims, have testified at the hearings for the November 13th terror attacks here in Paris. The landmark trial is entering its second phase this Tuesday, with the court now set to examine the personalities and the backgrounds of the suspects, including the only surviving member of the commando that carried out that series of attacks. Well, for more on the context surrounding the trial, I'm joined by Kevin Jackson, who is the research director at the Center for the Analysis of Terrorism. Thank you for joining us on the program,
Thanks
Kevin.
for having me.
So earlier this year, you, along with a journalist at Le Monde, published a graphic novel called La Cellule, or The Cell, which is a look into the commando behind these attacks. Why did you decide to choose the graphic novel format?
Well, the idea was to provide the general public with a comprehensive account of the story behind the Paris attacks, because I mean everyone remembered where it was during these attacks and what happened that night, but we realized that many had forgotten or just simply didn't know really the main players and how they planned the attack. So we decided to look back at these events, and yeah, we thought that it might be a good idea to write it down through a graphic novel, so that I mean even non-specialists could easily access this complex story. Yeah.
Okay, I want to move into an equally complex topic, which of course is the personalities of the attackers. How do you explain the fact that so many of the men that have committed these attacks in France or elsewhere in Europe are French or from other European countries, especially because they often justify their actions by saying it's retaliation for military airstrikes in the Middle East, but very few of them have actual links to the Middle East?
Yes, but I mean, you have to remember that Europe has always been a fertile ground for jihadism. I mean, there have been a few attacks during the early 2000s, but you know, with the war in Syria, basically galvanized a new generation. I mean, it mobilized the veterans of jihadism in Europe, but also galvanized a new generation, which eventually mostly sided with the Islamic State in Syria. So even when they didn't travel to Syria or failed to do so, they were still motivated to attack on behalf of the Islamic State, mostly, yeah.
And the court will hear from the only surviving member of that commando, Salah Abdeslam, on Tuesday. What do we know about him, and what do you think we can expect to hear from him and the other suspects as this questioning continues?
Salah Abdeslam is a friend of Abaoud, I mean a childhood friend.
Who was the ringleader of the attacks.
Exactly, and they come from the same background, the same area in Belgium, and I mean he mostly was involved with logistical matters. He facilitated the return of the Syria returnees. Included a large number of the attackers of the Paris attacks, and yeah, I mean he was basically involved in all things logistics, and he even drove the three attackers of the Stade de France before, and he was supposed to blow himself up during that night, but I mean his explosive belt was defective. But we're still not sure if he failed to detonate it or if he renounced at the very last moment. But and I mean, he didn't say much during the investigation. He spoke once during the first one, and then went completely silent. So I don't expect much at that trial, in the sense that he has spoken so far, but mainly to justify the attacks and trying to legitimize and rationalize the reasons behind, I mean, his motivation and that of his co-accused. So, yeah, he might speak again, but that doesn't mean that he will shed new light on the investigation.
And speaking of new light, just as perhaps as a final question for you, Kevin, part of your novel also talks about some of the failures on the part of security services to prevent the November 13 attacks. What went wrong, in a nutshell?
In a nutshell, we can say that, and this is what we try to explain in our graphic novel, is that the intelligence services were onto the main players of the attacks. I mean, before they occurred. The thing is, they were always a step behind. So even though they had identified someone like Abdelhamid Abaoud, the ringleader of the attacks, they thought that, and I mean, we were like in September, October 2015, and they were still thinking that he was in Syria directing plots and attacks in Europe, while he was in Europe since August of 2015. So while they had really, I mean, the attacks were not a surprise for the intelligence services, but they failed to locate the players and really identify basically.
All right, Kevin, unfortunately, we will have to leave it there with that. I know it's a really complex subject, hard to sum up in such a short amount of time, but thank you so much for those added elements.
Thanks.
Well, that's all we have for you for this edition, but do stay tuned. More news and analysis is coming up on France 24.